Tomasz. Maybe would you mind being the first one to answer?
Okay, hello everyone, nice to see you. We are currently working on Healthy at Healthy we're working on a software which is to help clinics get more patients, which is basically a CRM for private clinics, and that's what we do at Healthy. And we also want to help the whole patient management process in the clinics. It's actually a relatively new company. I recently closed my previous ventures, so there's maybe still more to say in the future. But for now, that's the vision, and that's what we are building, so stay tuned.
So, hello everyone too. My company is helping to possess European Union money. I started it 4 years ago, and since that time, as you said, we help Polish entrepreneurs to get right now more than 160 million Polish zloty. So our role is to prepare documentation for the funding and to help to prepare the best projects that will fit to the program criteria and get the funding.
Okay, thank you. And Vanu?
To understand what my company is doing, you first of all need to understand what is the fundamental problem in the drone market. So basically every drone on the market, no matter if it's a civil or military one, is flying half an hour, maybe 40 minutes. And then we call it a protein interface, a human. Somebody which should take control over the drone, land it, exchange the battery, and then the drone can continue the mission for the next half an hour. So what my company is doing, we are building the boxes, the charging stations for the drones where any industrial drone can land autonomously without a human, exchange the battery, and then continue its mission 24/7 without human. And we sell it to the security and defense market.
Okay, so I would like to start our panel by asking you about your history, let's say, because despite your young age, you have all achieved a notable success, either by getting on the prestigious 25 under 25 Forbes list, or by raising huge funds for your innovative ideas. And could you give us more insight? What was your road? What does this road look like? Maybe Vadim this time.
Sure, fine. So, well, for me, the key moment in my career was when I went to study in high school in the US. This was the place where I started learning robotics. And luckily, I got to the academic lab, which was the best in the world. And it actually was because we won all the national competitions in 2010, and we won the third place at the World Robotics Competition. So that was the moment when I realized that probably I can do something better than the rest of the world. After that, I moved back to Ukraine, into Poland. I started university here, didn't finish it. Long story, but I founded in 2015 my first company working at Microsoft, and we were doing drones. We were doing military and defense drones, and this was our first experience, business experience. And at the time, I knew a lot about technology, and I knew nothing about business at all. I even didn't know that there is something called ZUS, and you need to pay it. And after 6 months of doing business, I got, I don't know how to say it in Polish, in English, zajęcie konta bankowego from ZUS, because I wasn't paid for 6 months. So this was my start in business. But luckily I got partners who were, during my role, I got partners who were way smarter than I am. So right now we are one of the most, I would say, promising tech companies in this segment of autonomous drones. We hire almost 30 employees. We're in a very interesting moment in our life where we're building a factory, which is very, essentially due to the EU funds, because we won a contract from the Polish entrepreneur agency, right? PAR? Exactly. So, and 4 years ago when we were talking with them for the first time, they were smiling at us, saying, no, trans doesn't make sense, nobody's using it, and it's a toy that you can buy in a store. But right now, when big enterprises like Orle, European Defense Agency, European Space Agency are using our technology, they suddenly said, okay, makes sense, we will fund the factory. So yeah, this is like in a few words where we are.
Wojtek?
So from my childhood, I wanted to be an entrepreneur, and I was looking for the way for it. So being 17 years old, I was in high school. I was observing what kind of business could I set up. There were like school parties at that time, that each high school has to have its own party. So I went to the club because it's Polish tradition that each high school has in the middle of the school year has its own party. And so being in the second year of my high school, I started to organize students' parties. So I was in one high school, but I was organizing more parties than just my school. So it was quite successful. That almost 30 people worked and were selling tickets to these parties. More than 1,000 people were coming to it. And then after 3 years, even being living here in Warsaw, I was organizing it in Poznań because I was coming from the city. And it was after this, because it was very successful, for me it was hard to go to work. So long story short, I had some colleagues in the Unilever company. They were looking for the entrepreneur who will organize for them the project for their brand called Algida. And being 21, I organized big action for them. We sold 250,000 Magnum ice creams, and after that I knew currently that it's not. I would like to do some more in the finances area, so I set up Grants Capital, and right now we have more than 10 people hired, 2 million revenue, and we are rising 3 times year on year. That's my story.
Okay, Tomek?
Okay, so I'll try to make it more of a real story, which sounds cool. Because when I look at the retrospective, that's how it was. So I always wanted to build things, and I always liked doing things, like building something, from ground up, setting up some environment of people who are working towards a common goal. And but I had this fault, let's say, of being a very good student. And so because of being a very good student, then all the people set up the path for you. So if you're a good student, they tell you, then you go to this high school, then you go through this program, then you go to this university, right? And then you get the perfect job. And the problem is that for me, the sad realization was that oftentimes the job actually limits you. If you're a builder like myself, like, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong in having a good job, but if you have certain characteristics of a personality, it's bad for you. And I remember in high school, we used to have breakfasts. It was called second high school breakfasts, and it was usually with famous people of theater, of business world, etc. And we had a CEO of one of the biggest Polish companies, which I will not name for certain reasons. And then we had the actual breakfast. I was the president of a school board, so we were talking, let's say, in private, and no one really knew what to ask. So I asked him then, what's your biggest regret? and he told me, you know, my biggest regret is that I ever got into this company. One of the top biggest companies in Poland, and he's the CEO of it. And I'm like, how come? Like, that's probably the worst thing you can say. And he said, because it's not mine. So I have everything. I have car, I have millions in personal revenue. So I really, you know, I have a very good life. But at the end of the day, whatever I'm building, I can be fired the next day. And then I have to switch the company, which is a completely different environment. And because this, what I'm having, is actually not mine. So this really struck me, this thought. And I was kind of playing it 50-50. So on one hand, you heard, like I went to good universities. I went to New York University, Abu Dhabi, then I went to Oxford. So I had this 50-50 play. On one hand, I was placing the safe bet on good education, which I don't regret because it also came with very good network of people. But on the other, I was keep building things. So I had some, not different businesses actually. So I had some e-commerce, so very basic. I had some programming things. I had software in New York, which I later exited. So I had various businesses. Now the current one is healthy, but all of this was because I think of this conversation. So I was always thinking like, you know, I want to have a business, I want to build something, but then suddenly, you know, being a CEO doesn't exactly mean you're building this from the ground up. So I always wanted to be the builder. And with this kind of attitude, I think I kept going forward, and that's where I am now.
That was very thought-provoking. Yeah. And I want to ask you not only about your successes, but also about your failures, because on the path to every success there are a lot of failures. So could you tell us a bit about the ones that you have experienced along the way? Were there any difficult situations that shaped your career or brought you to where you are now? Maybe this time let's start with Wojtek.
I had a lot of such situations because I didn't work for anyone during my life. I didn't have experience, and I made a lot of mistakes. So the mistakes shaped my success, I would say, because especially in the finances consulting, which I would say it's it's a business for mature people, and because I started to consult people when I was 22, and I didn't I was very engaged. So it was my way to success. But about my mistakes, I constructed contracts where I didn't construct contracts well. A lot of mistakes. Sometimes even I didn't sign contracts with my clients. I have chosen bad clients.
Everyone does it, I guess.
I had problems with the staff, with people. I was lucky enough to have good people when I started, so the company grew, but later on I had some problems with it. Also, how to say it? I think even today I'm making mistakes, but I'm trying to not make one mistake 2 times. So I'm writing down them and in general I think it's normal, and the key is to have more successes than failures, and then you have to understand it, that sometimes there are very bad days, but in general you succeed, and that's my advice for the people who didn't start.
Adam, what is your experience?
Well, you know, the path of the entrepreneur is mostly moving from one problem to another. And I would say that the most important thing is like when you play poker, right? Statistically, most of the time in the game you're losing, but at that moment when you finally have good cards in your hand, you should make the right decisions. So this is the same in a business. I would say if most people here are entrepreneurs, everybody is doing mistakes, and there's thousands of them, and for this kind of discussions there are special events called the fuck up nights, right, where everybody is talking about mistakes. I would say in Poland we don't really have a culture of sharing the mistakes, and this is something that really needs to be changed. I'm really happy talking about my mistakes. I made a lot of them, still making, but I would like to focus on two specific kind of mistakes, which I believe most of the startups are dealing with. And first of all is the EU funds. Sorry for that, but I would say that EU funds.
I agree.
Yeah.
It's not good for the startups.
Exactly. EU funds are not for startups, and period. Because doing a startup, you need to be as close to a client as possible. You need to be able to pivot quickly. But signing a contract for 3 years and then 3 years after the closing the contract, which gives you 6 years to receive some money, like takes you out from the reality, and you start living in this EU bureaucracy reality doesn't have anything in common with the reality where your clients are living, right? So in my company, we took a grant many years ago. It was 4 million euros. To get this 4 million euros, 4 million zloty, you need to put 1 million zloty. We sound like a cool idea, but in general, that was something that almost killed our company because we started losing focus. We, instead of focusing on developing the product, we started to focusing on delivering the KPIs needed for the European Commission, and it ended up. Okay, for the European Commission it ended up as a success because we closed the project, but for us it was a total failure because for that amount of resources we put it in the EU project, in the documentation, in the cash flow, because the cash flow in the EU project is really hard, we would have been able to make a way better product, way better software, way better hardware, quicker than we did it, without EU funds. So this is the first problem, and for the young startups, I totally don't recommend taking EU funds because usually it kills your business. I know way more businesses that were killed by EU funds that actually were scaled up.
It's inflexible, it's the one word.
Okay, thank you. And the second problem is people. My first and biggest mistake was that I tried to hire people for the hard skills. It never works like that because there are lots of talented engineers, software developers in the market, and usually most of the companies hire them for the hard skills and fire for the soft skills. And this was my great mistake because my background is engineering. Before studying in the US, I was a total nerd. I was afraid of talking to girls. Like I was afraid looking at girls. I wasn't even be able to talk to people of my sex, right? So, and when I started my company, it was 2015. I hired people who looked like very talented engineers, black belts in what they do, and after 6 months, I fired all of them. I fired all of them because, you know, in the organization there are two types of people. There are givers and takers. And givers are the people who are giving more than to the organization that they're taking, and takers in the opposite direction, right? And when you have a team of 5 people, it's enough to have one taker to make all your organization toxic. And this is what happened in my company. It also was the problem that those people were my friends. We, you know, a few months before we started the company, we were having beer together, we were working together at the academic club, we were going to the conferences, and now, finally there are KPIs, there are clients, and they need to deliver something. And it didn't work well. So, like my biggest lesson learned at the beginning of the business, besides that you need to pay taxes, was that you need to hire people for their soft skills and that you need to check their soft skills at the very beginning. And this is probably, I would say, the most important thing for the CEO and for the company at the beginning.
Okay, Tomek?
So I'll agree with everything what was said before. I'll quickly follow up on it and then say my two failures. So first of all, with EU grants, I agree totally, because you can't really plan 2-3 years ahead. Like, it's impossible. If you have this brilliant idea, which will change the world, obviously, and will be next Facebook, first of all, the chances are very low. And secondly, you see with the process of development how you're changing and adjusting your product to the customer. So what you initially thought will be successful sometimes changes completely. You pivot a few times. But when you apply for a grant, you need a set vision for 2-3 years ahead, sometimes longer. So you can't really do that. That's why
that's not right, actually. When you're submitted to a grant, you need to show a business plan for the 5 years ahead.
Okay, so even 5. I think it depends on the grant too.
Sometimes for the 10 years.
Okay, so see, that's really impossible. If you have an established business, then there is a reason for it. But otherwise, I think it's really hard, almost impossible. And then my two failures. So I thought about my mistakes I actually made, and I would say 2 are the ones which are worth sharing for sure. So first one, especially for beginning entrepreneurs, is don't try to do everything on your own. So that's a mistake often made, that people think that they need to know everything what they're doing. Whereas when you look at any company, Tim Cook doesn't code Apple's phone. He doesn't code software, etc. He doesn't need to know it. There are people to do it. He needs to know, let's say, the vision of it, where it should be going, but he doesn't need to know the hard skill per se. So you don't really need to know everything to start whatever you want to build. You need to find yourself people who want to build it with you. So that's let's say, the first lesson learned. So I was trying to, let's say, learn everything I was trying to do and build it by myself. Whereas actually you only have 24 hours a day, and you're really not going to change it. So you better use your skills, your special perspective to do what you're best at, and then surround yourself, hire, give them shares, whatever, with people who will do the other job for you. And the second thing is also kind of connected with it. Let's say the failure is we often have an attitude of working but not getting the work done. So we want to keep busy. These days everyone is busy. They say, I'm always busy. They have certain calls all the time, right? They're on a call. They can't really work, right? They're just grabbing this coffee with this friend of mine who will connect me with someone, etc., etc. And they never get the job done. Whereas if you look at any successful business, there are long hours of hard work, sometimes on your own, without any other distraction, that is behind the success of the company. So we always want to be the CEO from the TV screens, but we never see how hard it was for them to get there. So that's a mistake often made, that people don't want to really get the job done. Don't ask themselves, okay, but how is this getting me closer to the goal I want to achieve? That is why for me, and those failures are connected, it is really important. There's this really good book which is called Start With Why. And the why is kind of the binding thing of your company. So if you're building a business, you need to have a certain vision. I know this all sounds sometimes, for me, when I first heard it, it was okay, this is BS, right? People talk about this as all this business talk. But it actually works. People want to work for you because of what you're building. So this is connected with the hard and soft skills. You can get great engineers, but it's really cost of the product you're building. And they will sometimes even work for less just because they want to, let's say, follow your vision, do something cool with their life. Because at the end of the day, a few bucks here, a few bucks there don't make such a difference of them, being proud, literally at the dinner table and telling them, their family, what they are actually now building and working on. And with ourselves, it's the same. Sometimes we don't do the most optimal things, let's say from financial standpoint, but we want to do the things which we consider are rewarding for us and which we feel better with. So it's the same with your coworkers, with people with your co-founders, and with people you're hiring. So that's very important, to have a set up vision of what you're doing and be able to, to kind of give this vision to other people, because they will follow you because you're passionate about it. If you just get them with the money, they're not the good employee, especially not the initial ones, because later on the company gets bigger, you kind of lose control sometimes over it. That's based on your HR, etc. That's why in corporations there's not such a big belonging, let's say, to the company as it is in small companies, right? Because everyone there is driven, and that's the difference.
I actually want to add something, because you said something very important, and this rarely is being told on the conference like this. Because doing a traditional business and doing a startup is a total different thing. And we're not talking about scaling, investment rounds and so on. It's on the cycle level, because in the startup you are dealing with a really huge amount of stress, because you cannot predict what is going to be tomorrow. And you cannot predict it in everything, because if you have a 3-people team, you cannot predict if tomorrow your CEO won't fire. If you have a small market where you are rising, you cannot predict if your product will succeed. When you're closing the investment round, you don't know if this term sheet finally will be signed or not, right? So you live constantly in a huge uncertainty about your future. And this is what is rarely being told by most founders of the startups, even large startups, are dealing with the emotional burnout. This is probably, many founders don't get to this phase in their life because their startups fails faster. But when you're big enough, when you get into the new stages of your business, this really becomes a problem. And before you have a startup, before you run a startup, if you believe in it, and if you want your team to see you as a visionary, to believe in you, find a good psycho doctor, because it will really help you in the hard times when you lose your vision, when you lose your why should I do this, why should I wake up in the morning, why should I solve this problem, why should I be running this company. And try to find this doctor and find this company, startup, only if you have everything okay in your family. Because at the hardest moment, when everything is breaking apart, when your team stops believing in you, and I had these moments, this is from my own experience, the only person that will be supporting you, a few people, is a family. So be sure that when you build a business, your background, your fundamentals in your family is okay.
Also, I think that each startup founder, especially the young one, has to verify the demand for their solution, because there are a lot of plenty of founders that they are living in the dream that everybody wants their product, but the truth is completely different. So if someone is doing internet business, I think that they have to do a beta one and test it, because it's easy to say, but what I see as a managing partner of the company that helps young entrepreneurs is that it's not so, not everybody is thinking about it.
Can I add, Owen? I think it's a case about not being afraid of what you're doing and getting it out as soon as possible. So even if your product is crappy, doesn't actually work, or even if you have just an idea, like you should play with it with the outside world, like bounce it. Don't like hide in the basement, code for ages, and then release this marvelous product, because it's just not going to work. The sooner you release it, the sooner you face the customer, the sooner you hear feedback. That's how you build a good product. Otherwise, you can't predict what other people need. You might have an idea, you can see a problem, you can see a possible solution, but you don't really, you can't predict everything up ahead. It's like with this planning of EU funds, right? Like it's similar problem.
So done is better than perfect, and fake it till you make it.
Oh yeah.
No, fake it till you make it actually doesn't work, trust me, especially in the hardware business, because this can really, like the market is very small. So fake it till you make it worked 20 years ago. Right now, this is the easy path to failure, because we tried like this and we almost failed. Because our solution is working on the defense market. It's a huge piece of the hardware that weighs almost 700 kilos. Those are drones that are flying a few kilometers above the ground, and if you try to fake it there, that can end really bad, trust me. So
maybe it depends on the product.
Exactly. If you are e-commerce, okay, fake it until you have the.
I mean, you can sell the
around.
product without having the product,
Exactly.
right? Like announce it, you know, send
like I know
pre-sale.
I know one very cool startup that is trying to do. It's a unicorn actually. That is trying to do AI in image recognition. You upload the image, and it's an API-based service that recognizes what's on the image and sends you back the information. And recently they closed the 400 million round, and it turned out that there is no AI behind, but there are 12,000 Chinese and Indians working in real time and solving puzzles on the images. So in that case, fake it will make it works, but it really depends on the organizations. I wanted to add something about what you said, but I forgot. Sorry.
That was very interesting. When I was listening to you, I was thinking that you are all very brave, and you are also confident in talking about your failures, about your mistakes. I think it is not that common within young people in Poland, because there are some researchers that says that in the European Union, the average percent of people, of young people who want to start their own business is like 12%, and in Poland it's only 6%. But the research also showed that young people in Poland feel prepared. They feel like they know what they should know to start the company. But the factor that is disturbing is the fear. Is the fear of the failure, that they will start the business and it won't be a success. What do you think about it? Maybe you were all studying abroad. Maybe that was the factor that maybe helped you. Do you think that maybe the school in Poland is the place when young people are learning to be afraid of asking, afraid of failure?
You know, I would say that young people are right to be afraid to do business in Poland. Recently there was a ranking which showed that Poland is the #2 hardest hardest country in the EU to do business. And they're right, because let's say you're a 20-year-old entrepreneur that has some cool idea. He starts the company, he gets an EU grant, he gets money from investment fund from the EU money, let's say some Bridge Alpha, and then it doesn't work out. And try to close this company. It's a pain in the ass for years. It will take you years to close this company with lawyers, with a lot of stress, with a lot of depression, problems, personal, emotional. I had an employee that had a software house in 2017. He failed, and he was doing this software house on his, I don't know how to say it in English, działalność gospodarcza. Exactly. Not a limited company. And when he failed, he had about 50,000 euros of debt, and it took him 3 years to get out of this. If he would work in the US, that would take him 3 months. So once again, I would say that the young people are right, and from the bureaucracy perspective, from the legal perspective, Poland is not prepared at all to make it startups. Because in startups, if you start quickly, you iterate quickly, like the founder of the Facebook said, move fast and break things, right? That's not about Poland. Try to communicate with the tax legal offices, try to, okay, bookkeeping. That's like, if you're entrepreneurs here, you know that's pain in the butt for everybody, because bookkeeping in Poland per month cost me more than bookkeeping in the UK per year. So this says about something. In the UK, there are 3 tax offices for the whole country. In Poland, we have like 150 of them. That also says about something. You know, if you are dealing with the international shipments, you start selling abroad, and you have tax returns, and you're a young startup, you don't have advisory, try to communicate with the tax office, Urząd Skarbowy. We had a situation a few years ago where tax office didn't want to return us the VAT tax, and it took us 13 months to get it back. And it's very hard for a young startup which doesn't want to work on papers, on documents, which wants to focus on the technology, to iterate, to move fast, to break things, to scale up, to be the global player, to work. That's all.
That was very insightful. Wojtek, what's your opinion?
Well, I can add here that below is too complicated. And,
That's another argument.
yes.
Like to start a company, sorry, but I will add something. To start a company which will do a technology, it's best to have a bookkeeping, a legal advisor, a tax advisor, a few other advisors that will just help you to get through all these documents. And it's right that you can make this prosta spółka akcyjna, you can do it through the internet, but then, and it's a beautiful poetry, but then the next day you wake up and you start dealing with this more and more complex bookkeeping that doesn't give you, it gives you nightmares.
So, but I think here that they are changing stuff. It's PSA, so prosta spółka akcyjna. It's a good sign. Also, I think that making like compound loans for zero taxation. It's also good. It's working in Poland. So also we have talented people, talented workers here in Poland, especially. Still, we are salary are not as high as the Western countries. So it's not. I think in some reasons it's a good place to run a business. For me, I learned such a bureaucracy. For me, it's normal as taxes, as ZUS. I know the law. Of course, I'm learning it a bit. I'm reading the paper.
Can I have a question?
Yeah.
How much time did it take you?
1 hour per week, let's say. But it's not efficient.
But of learning or?
Reading some how to pay different taxes.
I can add the positive note too. Like, it's obviously all true. Like, I agree. It's just, so the thing is that the initial costs are not that high. Like, I was starting a company in New York and the costs were much higher. Like, to actually do the paperwork and all, it was a few $1,000s. Which, like, in Poland, you can basically do it for $100, which is like, you just register a LLC and that's it. So the costs are theoretically lower. Then the problem is that, like, it also, I think, depends on the business you're in, but like, let's say you want to do something with food and all the permissions, etc., etc. There are like lots of things which no one informs you about. And for example, I heard, at least from my friends from Germany, that sometimes laws there are actually more bureaucratic. The whole country is more bureaucratic, but it's more efficient in terms of they give you feedback, they get back to you quicker, etc. In Poland, the problem is that they don't. And you just have to fight your way through. So basically in Poland, once you make it, you're fearless and you can do whatever you want because you actually made it through. So, but there are like advantages, like we have relatively low LLC tax if you compare it to different countries. So, you know, if you are smart and you can play your way through, you can get lots of benefits. But obviously there are lots of drawbacks. The thing is, like, always with these things, my question is, why does someone make it so hard for you? And I never get it, because there's no really value added. There's no, I don't know, bigger benefit for the country. It's actually lower because, you know, more companies go abroad. And they don't get anything out of it. It's just basically bad for you, but bad for everyone, no one profits. Why it's like that, I don't know. Can you make it? You can. It just requires, let's say, more of your time, more of your attention, sometimes more of your money. And it really depends what you do. As I say, like in the US, it wasn't as beautiful as I thought it will be. So some things there were like much worse. Or like going to a lawyer in Poland, theoretically you can afford it with some savings. In the US, good luck. So you know there are drawbacks on this and that side. And
it depends, because in the US there are lots of lawyers that are working with startups, and it was actually very strange for me, because in the Silicon Valley it's a common practice for the lawyers at the early stage of your company to do services for you for free, but signing an agreement with you that if you close the investment round, you are working only with them. This is a very interesting practice that I think will not work in Poland. But the question was about why young people are afraid, not why Poland is a terrible country, because Poland is not a terrible country for doing business. It's okay, because you know I'm from Ukraine, and if you try to do business in Ukraine, good luck, guys. It will not work, because it's like a wild west compared to Poland. So Poland is a good country. It's technologically developed, but still, comparing to UK, Germany, the biggest problem, the biggest problem for the startups is if they fail, and we know that most of the startups fail. 9 out of 10 startups fail, and that's statistics. What happens with those founders? What happens with those companies? And this is a problem that Poland didn't solve yet, because, as I mentioned, the process of bankruptcy of the company or founder, it's the pain in the butt, and like I don't want anybody to go through this, but I saw a few examples of my friends that were dealing with this, and it took them years out of life. It broke their families, it broke their physical, mental condition. So this is why young people probably are afraid.
I'll add to it. Yeah, in Poland you actually have to be brave. So I agree. But I think it's less of being afraid, because as you said, like most of them feel prepared. It's more of an environmental incline. So for example, in Poland, the vision, and it's still often the case, okay, of a private entrepreneur is like this vision of prywaciarz, which is very negative. Just like this guy who cheats on everyone, has the best car in the vicinity, and you know it's basically the bad guy who would rob his own family because he would hire them this and that way, and then in the end they would pay the tax, not him. That's the vision of an entrepreneur built by the communist system, and it's still, I think, ingrained in many people. So basically, if you're a private entrepreneur, you steal from people. No one knows how, but you do. So that's the bad. So the cultural environment is bad for it. So if you go to school, have you ever heard, and ask yourself this question if you're from Poland, have you ever heard like, maybe you should be an entrepreneur, from any teacher? No one ever says that. Those like things teachers never say. Go be an entrepreneur, build a business, and hire people that's good for the country because you create jobs. No one says it. So in Poland you have to figure it out yourself. So on one hand, because of that, let's say you can really get the best, but on the other hand you don't make it as massive, so you don't build a culture of business. So the difference is in the US it's like they all think about it. Like it's normal, let's say for companies, if they hear there's someone coming up with an idea, wants to try it out, let's call, they will call. Like they will talk with you, they will discuss with you, because they know you might be this next child who builds a multi-million-dollar company, because it happens every day.
If I can add something, in Silicon Valley, if you get to any Uber, every Uber driver will pitch you their idea for the startup. It's like...
But it's entrepreneurial thinking, it's
exactly,
like problem solving all the time.
In the Silicon Valley and a few other tech spots in the US, everybody is thinking about doing their business. And this really helps build this culture of entrepreneurship, and that's why people are not afraid. And even if they start, they know that there is something from their friends, from their network, that is a few steps ahead of them, and they can support. And in Poland, not yet. I believe this will change in the future. We don't have so much unicorns, we don't have billion tech companies, so we don't really even have many companies that close the Series A round, right? So we don't really have somebody to learn from, and this is the big problem.
Yeah, like just to finish on it.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Just like I didn't want to talk about the same question forever. But in 1980s, I was watching the speech of Ronald Reagan, one of his presidential speeches, and he was talking to young Americans, and he was saying with this great voice of his, he was saying that, oh, and now when you finish school, and it's like this great era of US development, maybe one of you kids will think, similarly to your friends a few years ago, that maybe it's worth not only going to become a plumber, to become a financier, etc., but close yourself and build something in your own garage. And maybe that will also profit and benefit the society. So it was, of course, referring to Apple, which in the 1980s was already a successful company. So I can't imagine any Polish official talking like this today. And we are already in 2021. So that's the difference of a mindset. So but everyone will tell you, be a good teacher, be whoever, but basically, even the current tax system kind of refers to it, that basically if you earn whatever above 7,000 zloty a month, you're basically too rich, which is a bad attitude. This is not a mentality of multitude, so mentality of we have and we should create more for others because then everyone benefits. This is kind of mentality of you better not stand out, which is not good. On the other hand, there are lots of good things in the Polish environment which promote, let's say, good skills, which, for example, in the US they say it's the country of CEOs, but they lack engineers. In Poland it's reverse. We have so many engineers, but we lack people to pitch the products and actually have visions. So, we have our own advantages too, but then it's the attitude that should change.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. That's also why that in my organization, in European Foundation for Entrepreneurship Development, we are trying to make projects that are encouraging young people to be entrepreneurs, to take part in some business initiatives, to start their own companies. But now I would like to ask you about the topic that you tackled in our very interesting discussion, but maybe we can elaborate on that. Do you think that Poland is an innovation-friendly country? You said a lot of things that are maybe not very positive from Poland, but I think there are also some bright sides. So what's your opinion? How would you rate Poland in terms of doing business which is innovative? Maybe Tomek, you can start.
First, it's a hard question.
I can start.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll think.
R&D run by entrepreneurs. We are probably the second last, so almost the last country in the EU. We don't engage scientists into creating new products. It's also the reason why so many EU grants are in Poland to raise the amount of money spent by entrepreneurs for the R&D. And on this field, we are weak. There are some reasons that, like for example, the level of digitalization of some services. We are quite good. We are someone could say we are innovative, that so many people are paying by card, and this fintech is is developed. In general, statistics, when you say about if the country is innovative, then people are then you have to tell about R&D that is created by the entrepreneurs, and as I said, we are weak on this field, and so, in my opinion, we have to work hard to be better with this.
Okay, I thought it through. So I might not have the statistics in my head, nor I know maybe I might be wrong in what I'm saying now. I'll just talk about my impressions, let's say. So when you're talking about what was the question again? Like exactly the phrasing?
Is Poland an innovation-friendly country?
Okay, so I would say we have people who want to innovate. Is it innovational friendly? Then I would turn more towards the topic of a cooperation of business and universities, which from at least what I felt in Poland is quite bad, which is, you go to any Western country, so I'll talk about my own personal experience. Like, take Oxford, for example, right? In the UK, you have Oxford, Cambridge, they're basically factories of great scientists, and if you do MSc or PhD in Oxford, you get immediate job in some like high-tech industry. You can go to a hedge fund or like some quantitative intensive job. You can go to some robotics company, whatever. Like they're basically producing people for it, and there's a constant cooperation. Like Oxford gets funding from private companies which cooperate with those universities, similar as in Germany, right? Like Heidelberg will get lots of the actually farming companies to work on biological developments, etc. In Holland, you would have they have super advanced technology in building different types of potatoes, etc. This is all happening, and private companies profit, but they cooperate often with the public sector. I think in Poland it's still very backwarded in a way. So you have still people from the 70s, 80s in charge who think about the universities as something honorary to do and all of that, but you don't really you don't look for the practical purpose of your research or development, and that's a very bad thing to do. So what we lack is definitely the cooperation between the private sector and the public sector. It's changing because there are new people coming in, they think differently, they also see how it's done in the West and they try to copy it, but I think there's still long way ahead. At least from my experience, what I can say, that would be it.
Okay, Vanu, could you add something?
Regarding to what you said, if we're talking about stats, there are three types of lie in the world: the normal lie, the weather forecast, and statistics. So, if we look at the statistics, yeah, we are at the bottom two countries in the EU, which I don't really agree with. Looking at what we're doing, looking at the sector we are at, because there are two types of innovation. There is applied innovation and there is disruptive innovation. And I would say that Poland is very good at applied innovation, like fintechs, robotics, computer science in general, but we totally suck at the disruptive innovations. And as an example, take graphene, this two-dimensional carbon structure that potentially can change the world, right? We were one of the first in the world to work with it, and now we don't have any business doing it on a mass scale. And this is the very big issue, because from my perspective, we are very good at applying what is already on the market, connecting it together, making the final product, and start selling it. But universities, national funding, big companies don't really work on disruptive innovation. And there are many reasons to work this. First of all, it's lack of funding, it's lack of the, not really lack of the talented people, but talented people tend to move outside of Poland. And unfortunately, there are many examples when groundbreaking scientists, entrepreneurs just move outside of Poland. I have a great example of this. There is a company that I am happy to be a co-founder, and the guy, he's Polish. He, this bear from Bieszczady, he's from Przemysl. He created the groundbreaking technology. He created the drone that can drive, fly, and swim. And unfortunately, it wasn't in Poland. It was in the UK, in the Middlesex University, because, as somebody of you mentioned, they are working with large corporates and they just get huge, like unbelievable amounts of money to do research. And he created the product. He didn't have a penny to commercialize it. He went to Kickstarter, and without any marketing, he got almost $200,000 of funding on the Kickstarter. And then he probably made the worst idea in the world. He decided to move back to Poland. And it took him 6 years. And this is a little bit because of me and my co-founder, because we caught him at the airport when he was already at the depression and he had a flight back to London because he wanted to get back there. We caught him and said, no, it's okay, try it back in Poland, it'll be fine. And it took him 6 years to get from the moment where he was at that time to the mass scale production. And I believe, I don't have documents for this, but I believe that if he stays in the UK, he will do it way faster. The main reason, the main problem here, there were two reasons. First, he couldn't cooperate with any universities because universities in Poland are not very interested in groundbreaking technologies. They're interested in obtaining EU funds to get more money, to get more projects, to get more people, to build new facilities. Like the perfect example, our main production facilities in Rzeszów, Jasionka, in the special scientific park, and from the EU project, they bought a laser for cutting metal, which cost 3 million euros. They bought a 3D printer that cost 500,000 euros, and they don't have a specialist to work with. So it just stays there. 3.5 million euros are just staying at the park and nobody can touch it because there are no specialists. And this is a little bit approach of also the Polish universities, and Vitek needed to create some pieces of his technology to adapt, optimize it. He couldn't find scientists for this. This was the first reason, and the second reason is, I already mentioned it before, there is a lack of the large enterprise funding in Poland. Like, it's really easy to close the bridge, the seed round, maybe even Series A round, but if you want to talk about Series B, C rounds, you need to go abroad, because in Poland there is just no funds for this. And yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
That's not very positive.
No, but I mean, in general, we are very good at doing applied technology, because there are huge amounts of startups that are doing great. Like, let's take Booksy or Znany Lekarz, I don't know how it is, Doctor. They're doing an amazing job. But this is the applied innovation, because they connected the dots. They took the Apple ecosystem, the Google ecosystem, they used cloud servers probably from Microsoft. They built a piece of software and found a client for this. And this is applied innovation, and it works perfectly. But the problem is with the disruptive innovation. And this is where the government, the universities had a lot of work to be done.
Okay, so Vadim, I have a next question for you. Let's stay in the topic of the innovation. Because the solutions that your company implemented are regarded as unique across Europe or even worldwide. So could you shed more light on the process of devising such groundbreaking technology? Do you think this was a disruptive innovation or this applied innovation?
I would say this was accidental innovation. Because, as I mentioned, when we started, we're not a product company, and this was also one of the big mistakes in my life. We were a service company that were doing drones, robotics, and all this kind of stuff. And then, in 2017, we got our contract with the European Space Agency, and it was them who wanted to create a ground station where the drones can land and exchange the batteries. And when we finished the contract, something extraordinary happened, because it turned out that when you're working with organizations like this, the intellectual property rights stay on your side. Which means that they paid us for technology which we created, and we have the IPR for that, which was insane. And that was the moment when we made a very hard step and decided that we want to laser focus on making this technology. And it was a very groundbreaking, hard process for us to move from the service company to the product company. It took us years, but, and this is one more reason. In Poland, there are lots of talented engineers. And this is not a marketing bullshit, it's actually right, because we have our main R&D and production facility in Rzeszów, which is the heart of the aviation valley. And this is the place where all of the aviation companies build and service their engines and their aviation technology. So it has like dozens of thousands of really talented engineers, which means that in other parts of Europe, it would be hard to make a technology like we have. So for sure we are applied innovation, it's not a disruptive innovation. We're just putting metal pieces together, program them, and make the drone land on the hub 100 times of 100, which is the hardest part to do. And yeah, no, definitely it's applied innovation, but you know, Tesla is also applied innovation. I would say 99% of the businesses is applied innovation. Like you heard the story of Terranos probably, which you know, so, right? So this looked like disruptive innovation, but unfortunately it ended up as a lawsuit. So
it was fake until you make it.
Exactly. It's
like this one failed it to fake it.
You know, so like Uber, Bolt, all these companies is applied innovation, and I would say that companies like our startups, they cannot do disruptive innovation because we just don't have enough resources. Like let's think about the internet. Internet wasn't developed by a private company. It was developed by the US military forces. Then it was pushed towards the civil market, and most of the innovations, disruptive innovations, come from the government, from the universities. So yeah,
from the military.
Yeah, from the military too. That's why, like
GPS, same.
Exactly. You know, we had a very interesting story. 2 years ago, we were looking for the marketing and PR agency that would support us in the marketing activities. And when we found one, and we started telling them, it was in Poland, and we started telling them that most of our projects and our sales is in the military and defense sector. They said, no, you cannot say anybody about this, because you need to be like this shiny, pinky startup that is making the world a better place. And that was so crazy to hear that I just went out, and then we found a PR and marketing guy inside our team, which is still working with us. But what I want to show, what I want to say is that in Poland, and it's a problem with the most EU countries, just to be clear, in Poland and in EU, it's a shame to say that you are working with defense and military, because it means that you're doing probably the best stuff, but in my opinion, those are the places where the real innovation appears. Because working with the defense, working with the military, you have an access to the technology that will appear on the civil market only in 5 to 10 years.
Okay, thank you very much. And now I have a question to Wojtek. Because your company supports entrepreneurs in obtaining financing for a lot of innovative projects. And could you tell us what industries bring the biggest number of innovations from your experience?
What kind of industry? In general, we are possessing the funds for the production companies from different sectors, like even from furniture sectors, starting from furniture sector through IT to even cars industry. These companies are they are producing something, and our goal is to possess the funding to make it more innovative. It's how it's working. And about asking your question, I think that in general the Polish GDP is based on the different types of production. It's said that in general we are producing for the big companies, for the big Western brands. I would say that we are like planned for Germany. But also it's quite good because these companies are earning, and it's also the reason why the COVID-19 we didn't suffer so much, because we don't live by tourism, or we live on the production. So and also from my experience, I see how the IT industry is rising in Poland. Also, we helped possess like maybe 30 million for the IT companies. We are active in the grants for Industry 4.0, and I could say it would be most promising branch. So not one branch of Polish industry, but just implementations of Industry 4.0 in the companies it will be raising.
May I add something?
Of course.
So you mentioned something which is very interesting, and I really want to focus on this, because COVID has really changed how the work looks like. It's still changing, but the biggest difference in my perspective is the production. Because before the COVID, everybody was manufacturing in China, right? Sometimes in South Korea, but mostly in China. But now, after the COVID, it's almost impossible to do new stuff in China. And this is, in my opinion, a moment where the Poland can become at least the European leader in the manufacturing, because we really have resources for this. We have the money, we have the knowledge, and we have the expertise to make the production. So I see more and more examples where companies, even the German ones, are moving the production from China back to Poland. And
I worried you will say that it will become European China, but
no, that's not the one. that doesn't sound good. But I mean, manufacturing is important to our world, and like the new focus of the manufacturing will be closer to the distribution. So if the EU companies will want to do the manufacturing, they will do it in the European Union, and Poland is the right place to do it. So if young entrepreneurs are thinking about new businesses, new startups, I would say that manufacturing, optimization of manufacturing, automatization of manufacturers is a good niche where they can focus also.
It's actually a growing tendency just on top of it. But for example, there are now lots of companies which are actually not Polish, because let's say they are incorporated in Delaware in the US, but they are formed by the Poles in the US, and they hire Polish programmers, and everything basically they do is in Poland, but they are still incorporated in the US, which is kind of, let's say, the like playing the best of both worlds. What you're saying, like with products, is different, right? Because it's supply chain, it's physical product. With software, you can do it wherever you want. But that's also like an advantage on the Polish market, which is happening now, that because we have this strong IT scene, then you can always incorporate in the US, because like Americans always prefer the US company to talk to than some Polish, they don't know even where it is. It's true. So that's a huge advantage for them, but the software engineers are often based here, right? So the economy benefits from them, they earn a lot of money and they produce a global product, but it's still developed here.
Thank you very much. And Tomek, I have also a question for you, because you mentioned that over the years you have founded several companies in various sectors. And could you tell us, what part did innovation play in laying the foundations for a successful business?
Okay, that's a hard question, because Vadim talked so much about disruptive innovation, applied innovation, and now I worry that what I did was never innovative, so that's a very hard question. But what role did it play? So from my perspective, what I considered innovative, let's say, it played an important role, because it's very hard to, like, most of people, when they think about business, they want to start. I think that's a huge difference between a startup, right, and a classical business. That, like, with classical business, let's say you finish some university or high school, right, and then you just start producing. I don't know, you buy cheaper and you sell more expensive, right, and that's usually how business works. With innovation gives you this edge that you don't necessarily have to do it, because you can produce something new, right, which no one else has to offer. Sometimes by adding on top of it, right, so there's this applied innovation, or sometimes delivering something completely new, which is this disruptive innovation. So I think it played a major role. Like, to be honest, one of my first, let's say, money-making moves was, but then it was illegal for me to have a business because I was like 15. I imported some stuff from China. It was usually smartwatches, which is back then it was a very small scale. I never did it on a large scale, but you know, buying this from China was also kind of innovative in a way that this product didn't exist here. And I remember this was like a very shady way of selling, because back then they would call me to, like, you know, pick it up in person, and people would call me like, where did you get it? This is like some new technology. I always felt like I'm selling drugs, but it was all illegal. So that was an innovation in a sense too, right? Because you're bringing something new to the market. So it always played a role. So later it became a software, because I've seen it as the most interesting way of doing what you want, right? Because software gives you freedom to define your own universe, kind of, and what you want to sell, and you can apply it in so many various things. Right now, everything runs in software. Every business has a website, and this is just a growing tendency, which will probably never stop. It might switch to a different kind of virtual reality, but we will never get out of it. So yeah, so it always played an important role, and I don't see myself doing something else. I tried some, let's say, very classical ways of making money, and I didn't find it rewarding and passionate after some time. There are some things I really like. So for example, I invest like privately on a stock exchange, but still there I'm looking to like find an edge, and everyone is doing that, right? That's how like the biggest funds are found. So maybe that's the most classical thing I do, but otherwise I always try to find, you know, how to do it differently, to get the edge, to get it better than others, and this kind of friendly competition is always a good thing, in my opinion. That's what drives economy forward, gets people better.
Thank you very much. That was the last question from me to you. But now we are having a Q&A sessions. So, is there anybody that wants to ask a question our guests? Please raise your hand.
I'll ask you guys the same question that you asked the CEO. What regrets do you have?
Who should it be, me or all of us?
All of you.
That's a hard question, so who would like to start?
My biggest regret is that somebody told me that you can do multiple businesses at once, multiple startups at once. In US, there is something called the serial entrepreneur, and it's bullshit. Because I tried, and you know, as you mentioned, the day has only 24 hours, and if you want to succeed, if you want to become the leader in your industry, you need to laser focus. Which means that even in the product, you cannot have like semi-products, you cannot focus on some additional lines. I don't know if you have seen this Disney movie, The Loki, and it has this universe, and there was only like the only right universe, and then something broke up, and there was this additional lines of the multiverse. And this is how I was feeling when I was doing multiple businesses at once. And at this scale where I was, it sounded good. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I'm doing robotics, this, drones, and so on. But when it started generating money, when it started growing, there's only one thing that you can purely focus at a time. And my biggest regret is that I didn't understand it fast enough.
My biggest regret is that I started to delegate so late.
Until 25, the organism allows you everything, but then you learn what is a hangover, that you cannot work more than 80 hours.
You can learn it before, but it depends.
And so right now I'm delegating each task. It's not I want to do just management, and if I see any chance to delegate, I'm doing that, and it's like an investment that you are buying the time. That's the thing I could recommend everybody.
I regret nothing, no, because it got me where I am now and I'm happy with it. But on the other hand, of course, there are things I regret. One, let's say, is more of a thing I wish I did more than a regret. So it's that I never had, at least on the early stages of my life, is I didn't have a business mentor, which is, I think, really important, and people forget about it. Whatever we do in life, let's say it's primary school, and we have one teacher who is really passionate about their subject, so that's why you follow this particular subject. That's often the case. And it's same later with your high school, with university. Sometimes there's a subject you took, and because this professor had so much charisma, that's why you took a thesis with him, and that's actually why you ended up doing a certain job. So I miss that I didn't have such a mentor in business cases. I think, personally, I had such people who guided me well, but I didn't have someone who was like me, who I want to be, let's say 5 years from now, 10 years from now. So not some very old guy who's towards the end of his career, but someone who's 10 years older than me, and he is where I would like to be. So learn those small steps. I had to learn it either through mistakes, which I made a lot, or just asking around constantly. I didn't have this kind of person who would guide me, at least early on. I think now I start finding such people, but early on it was really hard. And because I came from a, let's say, very traditional background, so both my parents worked, they had some jobs and some firms, they had a good career, and they encouraged me to do the same. So very kind of stable, safe path for them. Starting a business initially was crazy. When I started doing, they were okay, that's cool, but it's hobby, but it's never serious. But when you say oh, I'm not taking another job, this is my only way of my income, and you never know what happens the next day, then it gets crazy. And they weren't maybe very happy about it in the beginning. Now they are, but I like this kind of mentorship who keep me firm in it and guide me through the process. So that's what I regret.
Thank you so much. So, do we have any more questions from our audience? Please raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Okay, so as there are no more questions, I would like to officially close the panel. I have no doubt that this panel will constitute a long-term inspiration for our today's audience. And I would like to express our deep gratitude for all of you for taking part in the panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.